Well, good evening, listeners. You're listening to Lament of Hope blog and podcast, and I'm here today with Meg Shaffer. She is the author of The Wishing Game, which was actually USA Today's best-selling. She was USA Today's best-selling author for that book, which came out last year. I read it recently, loved it. I really recommend if you're interested in it's sort of magic fantasy, but at the same time, it's in modern day and it deals with a lot of different things like trauma from growing up, foster care, adoption, single motherhood. I mean, there's just so many themes that are kind of hit in that book. It's a very emotional book, and but it keeps you on the edge of your seat. So I loved it. Highly recommend looking it up, The Wishing Game. But Meg actually just came out with her second novel, The Lost Story, which I've yet to read. It just came out weeks ago. So, Meg, kind of before we dive in and kind of get to know you, The Lost Story, first of all, do you think it's better than The Wishing Game from an author's perspective? And then, two, what kind of inspired you to write it and what is it about if you gave us a brief synopsis?
Thanks for having me, Danielle. Great questions. I do like the Lost Story better than the Wishing Game.
Mm,
Usually, most writers prefer whatever book they're currently working on or their most recent release to older books. It's just fresher in your mind. I think the phrase is recency bias. Whatever's more recent feels more important. You feel closer to it, so that's part of it. But also, it was a really incredibly hard book to write, whereas the Wishing Game
mm.
wasn't as arduous, didn't go through as many drafts, as much struggle, and so I feel very proud that the Lost Story even came out. It's actually the 1 week anniversary of its release. It was out last Tuesday. We're recording on Tuesday the 23rd, and it came out on Tuesday the 16th. So yeah, 1 week anniversary. The Lost Story. Well, let's start with the Wishing Game. The Wishing Game is sort of Willy Wonka for grown-ups. I wanted to do a
It
Willy
did
Wonka.
feel that
Yes,
way.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, Willy Wonka, and it's very clear parallels, and I even talk about it in the acknowledgement. So it was an absolute loving homage to Willy Wonka, kind of the Gene Wilder movie version more than the book or the later versions. But the Lost Story is more Narnia for grown-ups or Narnia 15 years later. I wanted to do a true fantasy novel. The Wishing Game is not a fantasy novel. There's not any fantasy elements in it at all. The only fantasy element in it is that the Willy Wonka character, Jack Masterson, is a children's author. And his book series is fantasy, and there's little clips, excerpts from the books within the Wishing Game. So the book within a book is a fantasy book, but the Wishing Game itself is all just contemporary fiction, just very whimsical and cozy. But the Lost Story is true fantasy. Portal fantasy is what it's called, where you go through a door or a wormhole or something into another world. And I wanted to do so many middle grade books are portal fantasy. And I had the idea of, what if you were that kid that went to a portal fantasy world when you were 13, 14, 15 years old, like the kids in Narnia do,
Mm.
but now you're 30 and you're back on Earth and you have a job and you're doing dishes and you have bad relationships, and you have these memories of a time when you were a king or a queen in another world. What does that do to a person? So that is where that's the premise of the Lost Story, where that book came from.
And it centers around two boys, right?
Yes, yes. They're only 15 in the past. There's two scenes set in the past where you see them as 15-year-olds who disappeared into the woods. But in the book, the main story takes place when they're 30. So it's sort of 15 years later. Now they're grown-ups. They've gone their separate ways for reasons of their own, which come out in the book. And then they are brought back together for a new adventure going back to that world.
Now, what did you want to convey with your second book? Was there anything particular you wanted audiences to, well, readers to kind of take home from it? I know for some authors, it's kind of like just read my book, whatever you think it means, you know, that's what I want you to think. But for other authors, I know it's, your book is a part of you and it's something you want people hopefully to understand what you were trying to say. For The Lost Story, do you feel like there was a message you wanted to convey to readers or
Yeah, there's several because there's several plot lines. So something I see a lot in adult fiction is horrible things happening to girls and women, and a lot of murders and violence towards girls and women. You see that in thrillers and mysteries, uh,
yeah.
contemporary fiction. It's just very common. So I wanted to take one of those characters, a girl who was kidnapped when she was 12, and give her an adventure and happiness and reward. She survived this horrible thing. And one of the ways she survived it, you'll find out in the book, is that she got to go into this world, this magic world. So another character in the book says, if a man kidnaps a girl or kills her, maybe he goes to prison, maybe he goes to the morgue. But what happens to the girl? She just goes back to school if she lives. If
Yeah.
she lives, she just goes back to school. She just has to go back to her life. And she says she should at least get a castle or a private island. If you survive something that horrific, you should be rewarded in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to write about that. But I also wanted to write about I don't love the phrase toxic masculinity. It gives people an idea that's not really what I'm writing about. But I wanted to write about two male characters who are traditionally very masculine. The one is a missing persons investigator who finds lost girls and women and brings them home, and is very good at it, and is quite noble and kind of a knight errant. You tell him there's a missing girl, he will go find her. The other guy lives in the woods. He lives on his own. He's very strong. He's a hunter. He's very self-sufficient. So we have these two guys who are seemingly pictures of traditional masculinity, but they are also deeply in love with each other and have this tenderness and this soft side and devotion to the women in their lives, and are even happy to serve a female leader. So I just really wanted to play around with those themes and ideas in a really, really fun way. It sounds heavy, but it is not. It is super fun.
And deeply in love meaning like a homosexual relationship or more of like friends, like Frodo and
No, they're
Sam.
yeah, no, they're actually both bi, and
Okay.
yeah, so that is one of the storylines in the book, is a romance between them where they have spent 15 years apart, and part of the complex um, matrix of reasons why they are apart from each other has to do with one of them still having feelings for the other.
Okay. So
Yeah.
it seems, I mean, I don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in the Wishing game too, you gave voice to a lot of characters that don't usually, I don't want to say don't usually because I haven't read every book in the world,
Right.
but I was really touched that like single moms and abusive relationships, which, I'm trying not to say so much, but for readers who've read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. Um, for the Wishing game, it was like you gave voice to a lot of people who don't really get kind of like a character voice in a book before. Like the protagonist of the Wishing game even was very unexpected for me, but she was so relatable, but she had a lot of baggage and a lot of stuff. And it was new for me to see that in a book. Um, Kind of written the way that you did too, where it's like you do have the whimsical side of it, but it does have some heavy life stuff that people can relate to.
Yeah,
Um,
Lucy's in her 20s, and she's broke. She's just broke. And
yeah, and she wants to
every
adopt a little boy.
and she can't. She just doesn't have the money for it. And a lot of us who were, dead broke in our 20s can relate to that. Trying to find a job that's fulfilling, that pays more than $5 an hour, you know. uh,
Yeah.
and in
Yeah.
her case, having to make these compromises so she can spend time with this child who she had very briefly been a foster mother to. She was his emergency contact after his parents died. And now she wants to adopt him, but she just doesn't have the money. She can't even afford a car, much less her own place to live. And I remember struggling financially big time in my 20s. And yeah, you don't see, it's not romantic, it's not sexy being broke. So books where we're romanticizing things, you don't see those characters nearly as often. And I worked in a children's bookstore in my 20s, and I do remember a girl coming in who was in foster care and
Mm.
wanted kids books, middle grade novels, that had protagonists in it who were also in foster care, and I couldn't find a one. And I knew the section really well. I was kind of an expert on middle grade fiction at that point. And I couldn't think of one, I couldn't find one, so that sort of stuck with me. When I got a chance to write a book with a child character in it, I wanted him to be, or her to be, in foster care.
Mm.
And also my husband and I had fostered cats, so that was our little taste of the fostering life and all the weird stuff people say to you when you're fostering animals or children, like, oh, I couldn't do that, I would get too attached. uh which is kind of their way of saying, I have a very soft heart, so it's a good thing you have a hard heart. Like, no, that's not exactly how it works. But yeah, I loved looking for characters that don't get written about as often, like the victims of kidnapping, like the kids who go missing. Usually, if there's a missing child book, you focus on the detectives or the team trying to find them. You're not in the
Yeah.
point of view of someone who's gone missing. And yeah, I wanted to focus on what happens to the kids, when they grow up, the ones who went through this, not the people looking for them, but the actual missing, the lost kids themselves. And
Yeah.
that's why it's called the lost story, because everybody in the lost story is lost in one way or another.
Did you like, have you always had a heart for, for instance, kidnapping victims or foster care moms, like, or is that something that developed when you started writing, or?
I think most writers will tell you that they feel like outsiders. That's just part. That kind of just comes with the job. We are outsiders, and it allows us to stand back and watch and observe. And so I always have a lot of sympathy for the underdog and a lot of sympathy for the outsider. So anybody who's an outsider, like a writer, um, anybody who doesn't feel like they quite fit in. And I do remember specifically in my 20s, it seemed like everybody I went to college with had it figured out a lot sooner than I did, had a good job a lot sooner than I did, had their life together a lot sooner than I did. I remember when my husband and I got together, think I was 31, maybe 31 or 32. And he teased me because I had two roommates. And he said, "You all live like a bunch of college kids." And here he bought a house and had a mortgage and that sort of thing. So even up into my 30s, I felt like I was behind everybody. So yeah, I do have a lot of sympathy for those kind of outsider types.
Did you did you major in like children's literature or?
No, I was just an English major in college. I just love reading middle grade books. They're the only books I reread. Will be books like A Wrinkle in Time or The Chronicles of Narnia, Holes. One of my favorite. They're just so beautifully written and they're so fun. And for short books, they're incredibly rich and rewarding, and you just turn into a kid again when you read a book that you fell in love with when you were 10 years old, like A Wrinkle in Time.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just love them. I love them.
So you knew you wanted to write books.
Oh yeah, so I remember being in the eighth grade, not eighth grade. I was 8 years old in the third grade, and my friend Kendra asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I remember specifically, we were in music class on a little break, and she asked me, and I remember saying I wanted to be a writer. There's not that many people who are doing at 46 years old what they said they wanted to do when they were eight. So
Well, it
that's been a
takes
real
a
blessing.
long time, I'm sure. I mean, you got to write the stories. You then have to find a publisher. Then
Yep.
you go through all of that process. I mean, it's not something that takes a short while. You have to really want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is not overnight. You have to, the metaphor I use is a lot of people think they want to be a writer because they have an idea for a book. They have they're struck with inspiration. Oh, this would make a great book. And now they think, well, I just now I all I have to do is go and write it. Well, that's the hard part. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like saying I have an idea for a cathedral. Well, at a certain point, you do have to go dig trenches and pour concrete and lay down pipes and start laying bricks
Yeah.
and wire the electric, and it's going to take 5 years. So yeah, it's a lot of work.
Well, even with the cathedral, usually you have someone else building it. The person who envisioned it usually isn't
Yes.
building it. So then
Yeah, so
but
you
the
have to do
author is
both.
doing
You have to
everything.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the first one was harder to write. Was it because it was the first one or
Well, The Wishing Game isn't my first book. The Wishing Game is probably my 36th or 37th book. I wrote romance novels under pen name for a decade for Harlequin
oh
before
wow.
I started writing more mainstream fiction, more family friendly mainstream fiction like The Wishing Game. So The Wishing Game is my debut in hardcover and a new pen name and a new genre. But
After 36. Oh,
30, yeah,
wow.
yeah, it was a lot of books.
So to you it didn't did it matter to you whether it got big or not? Or you just were like, I just want to write, so it doesn't really matter. Like, were you surprised by how the
Oh,
Wishing
I was
Game turned out?
delighted. I was delighted. The publisher took a big chance on it. The Wishing Game kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. There really aren't that many books like it. There are a few authors like TJ Klune and Matt Haig who write kind of, I don't know if family friendly is the right word, but it could be more family friendly, whimsical fiction. But those are about the only two I can think of. It's getting more. A lot of people are really looking for cozy fiction, but something like The Wishing Game, there's just not a lot of compared to stuff like domestic suspense and thrillers and whatnot, which there's hundreds of that come out every month. So they were taking a big chance, and I wanted the book to do well for them as well as me, because they had this faith in me and took a chance. And so yeah, that it has done so astonishingly well, has been wonderful. So I'm so grateful to readers like you who found it and talk about it and share it and get other people to read it.
And for you, was that um like would you have stopped writing, you think, if after like even 36 more books, you hadn't been able to get to this point where people would have been able to, or where it could have become a bigger thing? Because I know for some people, it is discouraging when they don't get that big break. And then you kind of go through this decision making process of, do I keep doing it or do I not? But it seems like those who really love what they do don't really care whether it makes it big or it doesn't.
It's nice to be able to pay the bills with your
Yeah.
right, so you don't have to have a day job. And that was really what is the important thing to me. Not money as in want to be rich, but money as in I can write full time. That's the goal. And as long as I can do that, then I feel like I'm successful, whether the book is getting, on bestseller lists or not. That's the important thing to me. But my romance career was pretty successful. But one of the things you learn writing romance is just get the book done and get it out and write a new one. It is a job. It's my calling, it's my vocation, but it's also a job.
Yeah.
You if you work at a bookstore or you're a plumber, you go to work 5 days a week. And so I treat my writing like a job. I go to work 5 days a week, sometimes more. But I show up every day and do the work, and I'm providing a service. I think it's arts, but it's also entertainment. Certainly during COVID lockdown, people were desperate for distraction, encouragement, hope, art. So we really saw how important books were during lockdown. I think it was a good reminder for all of us how much we need books, how much we need stories in our life.
Yeah.
So I feel it's an important calling to be a storyteller. And bards have been around for centuries. Storytellers and poets have been around, since ancient Greek times. So I feel like I'm in this long this long line of artists stretching back millennia, who told stories around the fire, or in Greek amphitheaters. So yeah, it's a great job. But yeah, it's not about getting the big break. It's just being able to do it and to keep doing it is
Hmm.
what's important to me.
Well, when you said you treat it like a 9 to 5, like what does it look like? Like what time do you start writing? When do you end? Do you start like do you have something you particularly need to do? Like for me, I love having a cup of tea before I start work, like right there. And that for me makes work nicer if I have my tea.
Yes.
Like for you, do you have little things that you just set up and you're like, okay, I have this little space and now I can start writing?
Not really. For me, it's get a couple hours in every day. Try to get at least 1,000 words in every day. So if I can get a
Okay.
thousand words in an hour, I could say I'm done. But usually if I'm writing that fast, I keep going because something good's coming out and I don't want to turn off the faucet if it's flowing really well. And then some days I can't get any writing done, and I will work on the business side of having being a professional writer, which is replying to emails or doing mailings. The law story just came out, so we have these cute little book plates that I sign, and then I send them off to independent bookstores if they want to offer signed copies of books. That was really time consuming. It's
Yeah.
doing a hundred mailings to, so 100 bookstores, 6 books plates each. That's 600 times I have to sign my name and fill out the little address and write a little note on the back of the card. So it takes days and hours. So there's a lot of non-writing work involved in being a professional author. So yeah, if I'm struggling, the story's not working, or I'm taking a few days off the book to kind of let my lizard brain figure out some problems while my active brain is working on something else, then that's the sort of thing I do. But it's every day. Every day I do something writing related. I will usually take Saturday off, kind of, but even on Saturdays I read, and reading is still part of the writing life, filling the well. So yeah, it's my whole life. But yeah, it's
Does
just an everyday job, but it's the best job.
does it cause stress when you can't think of something to write?
At this point, no. It doesn't really stress me out. It's mild at worst, it's mildly annoying. But I have been through this so many times that I know what it means. It means if I'm writing and then suddenly I don't know what to write next, it means something's gone wrong and it's time to stop and reevaluate and figure out what's gone wrong with the story. And it
Hmm.
almost always heralds a breakthrough. And that means throwing out the draft I'd been working on and starting over with a much, much better, stronger idea, better plot. And then it will take off a lot faster.
See, that would kill me because I would want it to be right the first time. So I
You
guess you
cannot be
just,
a good novelist.
I know exactly. That's why I'm interviewing
Yeah.
you. I don't write the
Yeah.
novels here. Yeah, no, so are you as a person like pretty easygoing, flexible? Things change.
Yes.
You're like, that's fine.
Whatevs. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. Because I'm
Yeah.
gonna say if you have to throw out so many copies before you get the final one, you have to be okay with just messing up over and over,
Oh
not
yeah.
getting the right
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, you can't be an artist and be a perfectionist. You would just lose your mind. Because just think about learning to write. And I don't mean writing novels. I mean learning to write your letters, learning the alphabet. How long did it take? A couple grades. It probably took you until second or third grade before you could write complete sentences fairly easily. And even then you were probably misspelling every third word. We all
Yeah.
were. So just think how many years it took you to go from being completely illiterate, unable to even know how to hold your pencil, to be able to write full sentences. Years.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But a
So
lot of artists are perfectionists, though. Maybe it's
they are, but they learn to deal with it because for them, perfectionist and an artist is a little bit different. It's more like we have an ideal that we're striving for. We have this vision of what our work of art will be when it's done, and it's kind of our
hmm.
holy grail that we're following. But if you cannot release a book until every single word is absolutely perfect to you, you'll never release it. At a certain point, you have to let it go. And Truman Capote had this wonderful, terrible saying that uh, finishing a book was like you take your kid out into the backyard and shoot them.
Oh
At
my
a certain
goodness.
point, you just have to just let it go. Just
Yeah.
let it go. Yeah. And you know, you will find it will come out, the book will come out, and you'll think, oh man, that would have been a great line of dialogue that I thought of 3 months after the book came out. And you just, well, it wasn't meant to be. Put it in the next book.
Do you want any of your books to become a movie?
It would be nice. That's not why I became a writer, but it would be nice just because a book a book that sells 100,000 copies is a huge hit. A movie that only sells 100,000 tickets is probably going to be a flop. You know, if Twisters only sold 100,000 tickets over, you know, its run this summer, it would not have made very much money. It would have been a
Right.
flop. So you just get a bigger audience with a book, and a lot of them are with a movie, and a few of them will actually seek out the book. You know, I saw the movie The Last Unicorn years before I read the book, but I loved the movie so much that when I saw that it was a book, I decided to read it, and it turned out it was even better than the movie, and it's one of my
Yeah.
fantasy novels of all time. So it does reach people who otherwise wouldn't even know the book existed.
What do you love so much about The Last Unicorn? What was your favorite thing about it?
It's so beautifully written, and it
Mm.
again, like I think like my books, I probably get it a little bit from The Last Unicorn. um Beagle writes about more outside characters. So he writes about a wizard who has failed. So he writes about a failure. He's a not a very good wizard. And then Molly, the wonderful character Molly Grew, is a middle-aged woman. So she's not a young maiden. She's you know, in her 40s. She's
Yeah.
had some bad relationships. When she sees the unicorn for the first time, it's one of these absolutely devastating moments in literature. Molly, 45 years old, baby 50, sees the unicorn and goes, why now? Where were you when I needed you? Where were you when I was a young, beautiful maiden? That's when you're supposed to meet unicorns, when you're young and
Yeah.
fresh and virginal. And now you come to me when I'm this. She says, now I'm this, pointing at her middle-aged body. Like, what can you do for me now? So
Mm.
it's actually, you know, about aging and you know, growing up and our dreams not coming true, and what do you do when your youthful dreams don't come true and now you wake up and you're 45 years old? What do you do? You do your best. You find a way to be a hero, um, on your own terms. It's just stunningly beautiful.
Hmm.
So highly recommended. But yeah, outsider characters, not the hero and the heroine. The typical hero and the heroine is the prince and the virginal maiden, and in a way they're the minor characters in The Last Unicorn. The unicorn and the
Hmm.
prince, this failure of a wizard and this middle-aged woman, are the main characters, and I love it.
Yeah, I mean that, but that's similar in the sense, I guess, of your books in the fact that they're very human people. So
Yes.
very
Yeah.
flawed.
Yes, absolutely.
Um, Even, the millionaire offer, at first he seems awesome and, he's got everything. And then at the end of the book, you realize there's a lot in his life that he
Yeah, a lot of
misses and
loneliness.
regrets. Yeah.
Yeah. And overcoming substance abuse and having to live in the hiding who he really is so he can, you know, keep his job.
Yeah.
Yeah, tough life.
I wanted to ask you, you're the with the wishing game, a lot of the characters have to face their fears, or their fears kind of end up facing them at some point, even if they're really not ready. Um, what do you think is something you've had to face, or is a fear that you have that you're afraid of facing?
Well, I think most of us who are in the arts uh, have to face the fear that we just won't make it, that we will, that this thing that has been our dream. Again, I wanted to be a writer. I said I wanted to be a writer when I was 8 years old, and that never wavered, that never stopped. But what if I couldn't do it? What if every book I tried to write, nobody would publish, or I tried to self publish it and it sells two copies to relatives? You know, what if the dream doesn't come true? And that's, I think a lot of people don't let themselves dream because they're afraid their dream won't come true. So it's better to not dream at all.
Yeah.
um, So yeah, the facing the fear of the dream not coming true, being 29 years old, about to turn 30, and crying because I felt like I was a failure compared to everybody else I knew who had a better job, or seemed to have their life in order. And here I was still, trying to write my first book, write something that wasn't garbage, write something that would get published, that would make me a little money. Yeah, it was tough. And there were points where I thought, I should just give up and be a bookstore manager, and I'll have horrible student loan debt for the rest of my life, but I'll just rent an apartment and that'll be fine. I'll just have a small life where my dream didn't come true and I'll be okay. But yeah, that's the possibility we all have to face when we have a big dream like being a professional writer, that it may not happen.
And what about for you now that it has happened? Is there a new fear that's kind of taken its place?
Oh, it's the old fear that it'll go away overnight. It's or the fear, the Catholic guilt fear that something bad will happen to balance it out.
I see.
And yeah, this that yes, I'll have a big success with one book, but someone I love will get in a horrible car accident. Those sort of dark dark fears that I think we all have when things are going too well. We think, oh well, just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I try to tell myself that the universe is not vindictive like that. Bad stuff does happen, and it might, but it's not punishment because I wrote a book that did well.
Right.
Yeah.
Where do you think that comes from? Because that sounds like, I don't know, is that something when you were a kid that you thought, or like was there something that happened in your life that made you think that way?
Pretty much everyone I know will admit to that when things are going too well, they get nervous.
Yeah.
Uh, and a lot of that, I don't know. I It might be just the sense that this belief in balance or karma, that we have, or imposter syndrome. Probably a lot of it is imposter syndrome. Somebody's going to find out that I don't deserve all this, so they take it away.
Yeah.
The happiness police will come and arrest me, for being too happy. Yeah, it's you will have to talk to a psychologist about it, but it is very common. This little nagging fear that the good stuff is going to go away overnight, but you just
Yeah, and I
have to,
feel like but I also feel like for someone who has received so many gifts, it's probably even maybe elevated to an extent because there's a lot more
you have
at
more to lose.
stake.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
than,
it's Janis Joplin who said, "Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose." So, so when you have a lot to lose, you do feel, uh, almost. I don't feel like a prisoner of success or anything like that. It's been wonderful, no complaints at all. But yeah, when you have a lot to lose, you have more to worry about. And anybody will tell you this once they become a parent, or are in a new happy relationship. It was fine when it was just me, but now that I have this other person in my life I care so much about, I'm worried all the time that something's going to happen to them.
yeah.
My husband's on a road trip today, and he was kind of in a cell phone dead zone, and he couldn't text me, so I was sending him text messages, check in as soon as you can, I haven't heard from you, have you made it yet? If he wasn't in my life, I wouldn't have been worried today that he'd gotten in a car accident or something. But
Yeah.
that's just life. That's just life. You love somebody or something and you start worrying you're going to lose it.
And for you, it sounds like you just, what you said is that you just try not to think in the balance type of framework. Like,
Yes.
okay, I've been happy, so now something's gonna happen, and you're kind of like, well, that just doesn't logically fit. So
No, it doesn't. The universe does not enact retribution on people who've had nice days. It's, and that's from Proverbs in the Bible, that the rain falls on the just and the unjust.
yeah.
Bad things happen to everybody. Good things happen to everybody. That's just life. So you remind yourself of that and you calm down.
It's still scary. It still is because there's so many unexpected things that happen. Because I know even for me, I've had a some very close friends who were very healthy and doing well, and they were young. And when you're young, you always think that nothing too bad will happen to you. And
Right, you're
then,
going to live forever.
right. And then when you see, like, for me, seeing my friends go from super healthy to like bedridden, it's like, it's really rough. You're like, this is really hard to understand.
Yeah, and it feels so unfair.
Yeah, it does. And it was, again, it's, your characters in your book were in the first one, because I haven't read the second one yet, were very relatable in that way. Because Lucy kind of struggled with that too at
Absolutely.
a lot of
Yes.
points.
Yeah, I mean, she just had a rough childhood, not really neglected by her parents who were focused on her older sister. And so she was always the odd man out, left out and felt unloved. And here she is trying to give love to a child who wants it and desperately needs it. He wants her to adopt him. He wants them to have a family, and she can't just because of money. And I remember my editor saying to me, how heartbreaking reading The Wishing Game was, because everything Lucy needs is really not that much. $5,000 would completely change her life. She's not looking for 5 million or 50
Yeah.
million. $5,000 and she could lease, she could get a cheap used car, down payment on a cheap used car, and put a security deposit on a 2 bedroom apartment in a small town. She could, it was just such a small thing, but she can't do it. She just can't get ahead, working as a teacher's aide. And yeah, so I do have a lot of compassion for people who their needs are so small and yet they can't even get that much. I remember many times when I growing up or in my 20s thinking, oh, I just need somebody. If I just had $500, I would be okay. If somebody would just give me
Yeah.
$500, I could make rent and buy groceries and fix the tire on my car.
Yeah.
Such a small thing, that just feels like a mountain for some people.
Well, nowadays, with you could only probably do one of those things.
Yeah, these days you need more than
500
500,
still not
definitely.
gonna go enough.
Yeah,
It's gonna be enough for the tires.
yeah,
Yeah. I when you were mentioning earlier that the wishing game was hard to write, why was it hard?
well, the Wishing Game wasn't very hard to write. The Lost Story was a nightmare, but the Wishing Game was easy for a weird reason. I had the idea for it in 2017, but didn't write it until 2021. So I had 4 years to think about it before I sat down and wrote it. And so I'd written in 2017, I wrote the first 50 pages, and my romance publisher at the time read it and was like, this is good. It's not a romance novel, though. Give us a romance novel. So I did not finish it, but I kind of kept it in my back pocket. And I
Yeah.
remember thinking, one of these days I will finish writing this book because this is a good idea. People are going to like this if I ever get around to finishing it. And then COVID, lockdown, plenty of free time. I was able to finally just sit down and make myself write it. And I wrote it in about 4 months. So that book,
Wow.
in some ways, took 4 months, but also in some ways took 4 years. I think having that 4 years to think about it helped me figure out all the plot problems. The Lost Story, however, I could not get right. I wrote 5 or 6 drafts of it and had to throw out entire drafts that did not work. It was just a much more complicated, challenging story, dealing with multiple plot lines, multiple timelines, basically writing a sequel to a book where there's no book one, because
Yeah.
the first time they go to this world is so important, and I needed to know everything that happened, but there was no manual. I didn't have book one sitting next to me while I was writing book two the 15 years later. So I was having to incorporate this first story into the second story. So I was making up 2 books in one. So that was really, really challenging. And to make that read easy and not complicated, to read like a simple story.
Yeah.
Uh, the best compliment you can give a writer is that it was an easy read, a simple story, because it's incredibly hard to make a simple story that is
Yeah.
also entertaining. I
Yeah.
mean, you can say he was born, he lived, he died. That's a simple story, but it's not entertaining. to make 400 pages simple and so that nobody's confused, they understand everything, every character feels real, all the various plot lines come together like it was meant to be, every puzzle piece clicks into place. When that's done and you're reading it as a reader and it feels predestined and everything's in place, it's a very easy read. But as
Yeah.
a writer, to do that is incredibly complicated. So yeah, when people tell me that it was an easy read, that's a huge compliment because it was not an easy write.
Wow. I mean, yeah, I can only imagine. But also, isn't your husband an author too?
Yes, yes.
Do you ever feel, do you ever get competitive about it, or is that hard at all at times that you both have the same profession?
Oh no, it's great. We really help each other. So it's kind of like two lawyers being married but with different specialties. So we completely understand the life, and it's a complicated life. It's a different way of working because just sometimes laying on your bed and staring at the ceiling, you're working.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody else, somebody who's not a writer would think you're being lazy, but we get it. We get that what looks like procrastination is actually problem solving, and sometimes I'll need to go on a walk and I'll say, don't come with me, dear. I'm working on a book. Because if we go for a walk together, he'll talk and I need to walk and think. And so if I were married to someone who wasn't a writer, that might hurt their feelings. No, I don't want you to go on a walk with me. He understands completely. He'll figure out stuff in the shower or when he's driving or whatever. So he knows that the non-writing, you have to guard your non-writing time. So
Hmm.
it's a bonus in every way. There is no negatives to it at all, except financially. Because when you're both professional writers with no day jobs, number one, you have to pay for your own health insurance. And when you're in your 40s, and you make just enough money that you don't get any subsidies on your Obamacare health insurance, it's an extra rent payment a month or an extra mortgage. So
Yeah.
our health insurance combined is about $1,000 a month. So it's not,
Wow.
yeah. And also, it's the freelance lifestyle. And sometimes it's feast and sometimes it's famine. So we'll have a really good year, and then the next year will be a really lean year. So you don't know when the year begins how much money you're going to be making. So that can be more stressful. But the upside is we don't have kids, we have cats. If you had kids, one of us would probably need a day job that offered good health insurance for the whole family and a
Yeah.
steady check. But when you're two adults on your own, you can live a slightly riskier freelance lifestyle without it being too stressful. And luckily, we've had very few years that were so lean that we were, thinking about getting day jobs. But yeah, that's really the only downside. A lot of writers will tell you. A lot of writers who work full time or write full time will tell you that is because their spouse has a good job and they can afford to write full time. But
Hmm.
so that's a blessing if that happens. But yeah, since we're both writers, we both really have to hustle.
Well, when you said you didn't have kids, you have cats, did you guys decide we don't want to have children because we really want to be able to pursue this full time, both of us, without that extra worry of the finances, or was it just something that didn't happen for you guys? Or
We just neither one of us wanted kids.
okay,
Yeah, it was never even a big conversation. It was more like, where, do you like to live in an old house or a new house? Do you want to live in Kentucky or do you want to live in Iowa? Do you want to have kids or do you not want to have kids? And we were both, we neither one of us were interested in having kids. So it was a very low stakes conversation that we were just both on the same page about. But it's been very, very helpful living the freelance lifestyle without kids. I see a lot of people struggling, especially I remember during COVID lockdown, one of my friends who's also a writer, luckily her kids were older. She has 4 kids. They were all older by this point. So she wasn't having to homeschool. And so she was able to meet her deadline and turn in the book that was due to her publisher. And she turned it into her publisher, and her publisher said, well, there's good news and bad news. The bad news is the book's not really working. We're going to have to do some rewrites on it. The good news is you're literally my only writer who's managed to finish a book this year. So this editor had a
wow,
roster of about 12 or 15 writers, and they were all having to homeschool their kids during lockdown, and they were not able to write and meet their deadline. So it really can be a struggle struggle, especially for women who do the majority of childcare,
Hmm.
um, to be a full-time writer and a full-time mom. So yeah, no regrets there. I love kids. I love my nieces and nephews. They're wonderful. I'm so glad I have them in my life. But we were just weren't people who wanted kids.
And did you feel that way your entire life?
Yep. Yeah.
Wow,
Ne-
okay.
Never wanted kids, and neither has he.
You know,
So
it's interesting because it's so unique. I don't know. I just have not, for me, the people I've met, it's usually they want kids of their own or they don't want any kids of their own, they want to adopt. And it's interesting to see just the different perspectives there. But you did mention you guys do foster cats, so you do
yeah,
still
we did for a while until I went back to grad school and was too busy to do it. Um, but yeah, I have a little social circle. All of my closest friends are child free by choice. A lot of married couples.
wow.
So
Okay.
there's a bunch of us out there,
Do
and
you think that's something
tend to
that's
find each other.
yeah, I was gonna say, do you think that's something that's becoming more prevalent?
I
Or maybe
think
it's just
so.
area based. I don't
I
know.
No, I think a lot of people, they are scared of the world right now, and they don't have a lot of financial wiggle room. So they give up the idea kind of early,
Yeah.
and just formulate a new plan for their lives that maybe include pets instead of children, simply because that's all they can afford, and they want to share their lives with someone, and they want to take care of someone, but um, kids just aren't in the picture, for one reason or another.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think it's becoming more common for multiple reasons. And some it's just people finding out, oh, I can do that. I don't have to have kids. I do have that option, and I'm going to be okay and happy and have a good life. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people have posted their stories online talking about being child free by choice, and how good that was for them for one reason or another.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, it's just a lot of people learning that's an option. But yeah, you do you, whatever you want. I'm all for bringing. I met a woman the other day who had she'd read The Wishing Game and invited me to her book club, and she mentioned her kids, and I asked her how many she had, and she said four, and I said, oh, good for you. And she said, wow, no one ever says that when I say I have four kids. Usually they say that's too many, or calm down, or close your legs, or something rude like that. I was like, it's just four. My dad has 10 brothers and sisters, so
Oh my goodness. Wow.
if you want four kids, have four kids. That's great, as long as you can take care of them.
Yeah. Well, for you then, right now, like, do you think your biggest loves are writing and your husband for your life?
Oh yeah, yeah. Writing is absolutely my calling. And to be married to someone who understands it completely is such a gift.
Yeah. No, that is so unique, especially that you both like you're both walking the same line with
Yeah,
everything, with the publishing, with the finances. You're both very in tune to the same thing, and that is really neat that you were able to
yeah,
do
it's cool.
that.
Yeah,
Well,
we're very lucky. We know it.
Meg, I want to be respectful of your time too, but for one last question, I have a lot of young friends of mine, my age, I guess, your early 20s when you're trying to figure out what you're supposed to do. And to be honest, I think the world in some ways is harsher for younger people now. There's just a lot more pressures, and there's a lot more, mental illnesses that people deal with. And there's just so much for young people to process and walk through. Um, and kind of like, even if your characters like Lucy, just the brokenness of situations in family and lack of support. But for those who, have a dream, they really want to be able to write, and, they're trying and they're doing the best they can to write stories. What is a way you think that you can encourage them in that, um, dream, and maybe even realistic expectations? Because I know sometimes, we think, oh, I can just write this novel and it's going to be great. I'll send it
I'll
off
be
and
the
the
next
publisher will
Stephen
love it.
King, and I'll be
Yeah.
rich. Yeah.
Which causes more sadness because then that
Yeah.
doesn't happen. I mean, what kind of expectations do you think and encouragement you can give to young writers?
I would say have a lot of grace and forgiveness of yourself, because this is a long process. So again, remember how long it takes you to go from not even being able to hold a pencil to being able to write, at one page. Just to go from zero to one page takes years. So it's absolutely going to take you years to go from one page to 400 pages. I could barely write. I barely had the ability to focus and concentrate and the mental energy to write a 4-page paper in college. I remember my 4-page paper in colleges being nightmares every time. I hated doing them.
Yeah.
Now 4 pages a day is nothing. That's breakfast. I'm just warming up at 4 pages a day. And it's you train your brain, you get better at it, and it does take years. So give yourself years. Don't give yourself some ridiculous deadline of I'm going to write a page a day and I will have a book in 1 year and I will sell that one book and then I will be rich and famous. No, give yourself years, years and years. And don't tie your enjoyment of the process to the outcome.
Hmm.
The most fun I have is figuring out book problems and solving them on the page. That is more fun to me than launch parties and finding out we sold the book to another country in another language. That's fun. It's a little extra money, but that is not why I do it. There are easier ways to make money. So the joy of the process, find your joy in the process,
Hmm.
and then the art will come.
Meg, that's so good. I think that's just good for life advice in general. Just, whatever you love doing, do it because you love it, not because you
Of
want
the
it to get
outcome.
big. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Or whatever it needs to be in your mind. Because then, you may not be doing it for the right reason or may not really be what you love. Um, that's so good. Well, Meg, I want to thank you, I mean, for your time and the fact that you did
Thank you,
this
Danielle.
after a free day frenzy book tour. And I'm glad you're healthy and well.
Yes, yes. So it was touch and go yesterday getting back from book tour. Like, are we coming down with something? Are we not? So it's good to wake up today and feel like, oh, I'm myself. I have energy. I am alive again.
Good, good. Well,
But
Meg,
great
thank you so
conversation. Thanks for
much.
having me.
You're welcome. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.